Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, July 15, 2025. Senate Republicans make changes to the House-passed rescissions bill to gain necessary Republican support ahead of the first procedural vote, restoring $400 million for PEPFAR, the global anti-AIDS program, and protecting funding for some rural public broadcasters. Inflation report from the Labor Department, up 0.3% in June. Annual rate is 2.7%, highest since February, maybe a sign President Donald Trump's tariffs are leading to increases in prices. House Republicans vote down a Democratic motion to make public the FBI files on the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein after the Trump administration stated Epstein did not keep a client list and did commit suicide in prison, which some of the president's MAGA supporters are questioning. President Trump today telling reporters that Attorney General Pam Bondi should release whatever she thinks is credible about Jeffrey Epstein. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations nominee Mike Waltz testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about reforming the UN, and also the Signal Chat controversy when he was National Security Advisor and a reporter was mistakenly added to an unencrypted app chat on a military operation against the Houthis in Yemen. Plus, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte meets with senators on Capitol Hill about supporting Ukraine in the war with Russia. Politico writes that Senate Republicans will scale back the White House's $9.4 billion spending clawback request as they look to shore up their vote count. Senator Eric Schmitt, Republican of Missouri, who is leading the rescissions effort in concert with the White House, said Republicans will remove a $400 million cut to the global AIDS program known as PEPFAR, bringing the total amount of cuts in the package down to $9 billion. Separately, the administration won over Senator Mike Rounds, Republican of South Dakota, by promising to alleviate funding cuts to public radio and TV by funding tribal broadcasters through a separate program. That was some of the reporting from Politico. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, spoke about this to reporters today.
This week, as you know, is the rescissions bill is the legislation that's going to be on the floor. At least we hope it's going to be on the floor later today. We're going to have a couple of procedural votes, and we'll see how those come out. But one thing I can tell you in the Trump administration is that there has been a renewed commitment to reducing spending. It's actually become in favor to try and find ways to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. And I think that was part of his mandate coming out of this election. It's something that he and his administration have committed to do. We have partnered with him when the One Big Beautiful Bill, with the biggest spending reduction in history on the mandatory side of the equation. The rescissions bill this week deals with discretionary spending, the other part of the federal budget. And I'm hopeful that we'll have the opportunity to get on that bill and to do something meaningful when it comes to reducing the size and scope of the federal government, and particularly in areas of our government where we know there is waste, fraud, and abuse. Now, the Democrats have suggested that they would shut the government down over us taking up rescission, that somehow that's going to step on the normal appropriations process. And I guess what I would point out is that rescissions have been a part of the process around here for a long time, not only in the annual appropriations process, but both administrations have in the past submitted rescissions packages to the Congress. And I'd also remind people that what we're talking about here is 1/10 of 1% of all federal spending. 1/10 of 1% of all federal spending. That's 1/1000th of the federal budget that's included in this rescission package. And so I hope we have the votes to get on this bill later today and to have an opportunity for people to offer amendments if they see things that they want to, they think they can fix or modify in the legislation. That's always an opportunity that people have when the bill comes to the floor. But clearly, this is something that all of us believe is a priority. When you've got a $36 trillion debt, we have to do something to get spending under control. Couple that with policies like we had in the One Big Beautiful Bill that create growth in the economy, expand the economy, create those better paying jobs and generate more government revenue. Couple that with spending restraint, both on the mandatory side and the discretionary side, and we can start to get this thing back into balance, which is where it needs to be if we're going to do anything meaningful to ensure that we have a better and brighter future for future generations of Americans. So that's the subject for today, and obviously we'll have an opportunity to see where the votes are tonight. Question?
Senate Majority Leader John Thune.
by changing the scope of this and putting the AIDS money back in, was that necessary to get votes to get this to pass the Senate? And what consternation does that cause across the building and the House by changing this and reducing the size of the overall package?
There was a lot of interest among our members in doing something on the PEPFAR issue, and so that's reflected in the substitute. And we hope that if we can get this across the finish line in the Senate, that the House would accept that one small modification that ends up making the package still about a $9 billion rescissions package, a little less than what was sent over from the House, but nonetheless a significant down payment on getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse in our government.
Was that pre-baked with Johnson?
Well, I wouldn't say anything's pre-baked, but obviously it's something we've been working closely with the administration on, and my assumption is the level of coordination that we've had between the House and the Senate that they would take up. You're still talking about a $9 billion rescissions package, even with that small modification.
Leader Thune. Senator Round said that he secured a grant proposal for local public radio in your home state too. How exactly is that going to work? Do you have to reframe or is that through an amendment process?
Well, it's actually it's a solution that he developed in working with the White House, with OMB, that allows them to reprogram some funding that would address the 28 stations around the country that receive funding through CPB that are on our Native American reservations. So it was an individual thing that he worked out. Yeah.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, meeting with reporters. ABC News writes that the Office of Management and Budget Director Russell Vogt met with Senate Republicans as some members remained resistant to pulling back all of the funding. Vogt left the meeting saying there would be a substitute amendment that would eliminate the cuts to an AIDS prevention program. That's PEPFAR. He said there is a substitute amendment that does not include the PEPFAR rescission, and we're fine with that. That was from ABC News. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, was asked by reporters at his news conference whether the changes to the rescission bill from the Republicans would change the Democratic caucus' unanimous opposition.
Does the change to the bill with PEPFAR make any difference to the Democrats?
Look, the Republican bill keeps changing. We still know it does lots of horrible things. The rural areas that don't have their radio stations, that in many cases is the only way or the best way they can get weather warnings, is terrible. They've changed and added a small amount on the foreign aid proposal, but it still leaves an enormous vacuum that China and Russia will fill. We're going to try to improve the bill in any way we can. Yes. Sekil. Look, we are doing everything. First of all, ask the Republicans that question. We are doing everything we can to keep the bipartisan appropriations process going forward. It's what every president has done, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, and it serves the country well because people are represented and don't get hurt. When one side tries to do it all, it creates big problems. We are pushing hard to get the appropriations process continuing to move forward, and that's why we're cooperating with the bills they're putting on the floor.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, at a news conference on Capitol Hill. The first procedural vote this evening in the Senate on the rescissions package will be a motion to discharge the bill from the Appropriations Committee. Simple majority needed, and Republicans hold a 53-47 vote advantage in the Senate. If and when the rescissions bill passes the Senate, it's likely to look different than when it passed the House. So it would need to go back to the House for another vote. So the same version passes both bodies and go to the president to be signed. Friday is the deadline under the rescissions procedures. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, asked about that at a news conference today.
Mr. Speaker, what's the consternation among House Republicans about possible changes to the rescissions bill in the Senate, and what that would be like in terms of timing as you're up against this deadline on Friday?
Yeah, the Friday deadline looms. We're encouraging our Senate partners over there to get the job done and to pass it as is. That's what we did. It reflects the the intention and the view of the House. This in our view is low-hanging fruit. This rescission package is, you're talking about funding for USAID, the egregious abuses that the DOJ analysis and audits uncovered. We've got to claw that back. The American people, everybody demands that. We can't fund transgender operas in Peru with U.S. taxpayer dollars, right? So come on. The NPR and PBS components this is, in our view, the misuse of taxpayer dollars. They're biased reporting. They're not objective. They pretend to be so. They have for a long time. And the people don't need to fund that. I mean, we're in an age of, you all know, you work in the industry. I mean, media is so multifaceted now. There's so many avenues and areas for information. And while at its origination, NPR and PBS might have made some sense, and maybe it does now, but it shouldn't be subsidized by taxpayers. So these are simple questions to answer for us. The House has acted appropriately, and I hope the Senate will do the same. I've urged them, as I always do, to please keep the product unamended, because we have a narrow margin and we got to pass it. But we're going to process whatever they send us whenever they send us, and I'm hopeful that it'll be soon.
What's this say about the mission if you're unable, though, to pass those things? So, I mean, the idea that Republicans talk about cutting the spending, and if there's a conflict, then you can't get it done through that deadline?
I don't accept defeat, Chad, so we'll see what happens.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, at a news conference today, and the rescissions package. One version has passed the House. It's currently pending in the Senate. And you can always follow it live, gavel to gavel, on the C-SPAN networks. The Senate is live on C-SPAN 2 and the House live on C-SPAN. This is Washington Today. From Associated Press, Education Secretary Linda McMahon is expected to move quickly now that the Supreme Court has cleared the way for the Trump administration to continue unwinding her department. Justices on Monday paused a lower court order that had halted nearly 1,400 layoffs and had called into question the legality of President Donald Trump's plan to outsource the department's operations to other agencies. Now Trump and McMahon are free to execute the layoffs and break up the department's work among other federal agencies. Trump had campaigned on closing the department, and McMahon has said the department has one final mission to turn over its power to the states. That was from Associated Press. Education Secretary Linda McMahon was on Newsmax TV today.
I was very pleased with the ruling from the Supreme Court, because what we did when we first came in was to take a look at the department, to take a look at what could have been, just too heavy in personnel. We weren't just trying to make radical cuts just to shrink the size of the department. We viewed it with exactly the right eye as, I think, an executive coming into a company to see what functions are needed, how many people we needed to do that, etc. So we're very careful in planning how those cuts were made. And I was very pleased that the Supreme Court did give us the ability to continue to do that and to operate the agency efficiently and to get all the work done that we needed to get done to meet all of our statutory requirements. And that's exactly what we're doing. And we were proving that we could do it at the time when we got the order that we couldn't proceed. So we're very happy to now be able to do that work and to do it well.
Education Secretary Linda McMahon interviewed on Newsmax. There's an article from Bloomberg Law. The U.S. Labor Department will take over workforce development programs from the Department of Education, putting into action President Trump's plan to consolidate all federal training grants into a single Make America Skilled Again program. Labor Secretary Lori Chavez-DeRemer announced Tuesday her agency had entered into workforce development partnership to operate certain adult education and career and technical education programs normally overseen by the Education Department, reporting from Bloomberg Law. Consumer prices rose in June, writes CNBC, as President Donald Trump's tariffs began to slowly work their way through the U.S. economy. The Consumer Price Index, a broad-based measure of goods and services costs, increased 0.3% on the month, putting the 12-month inflation rate at 2.7%. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported Tuesday. The numbers were right in line with the Dow Jones consensus, though the annual rate is the highest since February and still above the Federal Reserve's 2% target. That article from CNBC. President Donald Trump was asked about inflation and tariffs as he left the White House.
Your tariffs might have led inflation to increase last month. Do you think they had any role?
Well, we had very little inflation. I don't know. Who do you work for?
USA Today.
What?
USA Today.
Oh, well, they wrote me a beautiful article the other day, so I can't get angry at you. USA Today just wrote a very good article about me. What's that all about? So I can't get angry at you. No, there was very little inflation, as you know. The numbers were very good, very much inside the margin. So we've had no inflation. All we have is we're making a fortune. We are taking in hundreds of billions of dollars. You saw we had a surplus of $25 billion last month, which we haven't had in many, many years.
President Donald Trump speaking to reporters outside the White House. You heard Marine One, the helicopter, in the background. He was heading off to Pittsburgh for an energy and AI summit with, according to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, at least 60 industry CEOs, 6 Trump administration cabinet members, and Governor Josh Shapiro, a Democrat, where he and Senator Dave McCormick, Republican of Pennsylvania, are poised to announce a $90 billion investment in energy and artificial intelligence in Pennsylvania. That was from Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. President Trump today also at that news conference saying the U.S. will impose a 19% tariff on Indonesia. That's lower than the 32% he said last week would take effect with Indonesia come August 1st. More about inflation and tariffs. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer spoke this morning on the Senate floor.
Americans woke up this morning to a troubling headline. U.S. inflation accelerated in June as Trump's tariffs pushed up prices. That's what the New York Times said this morning. We've said from the start that Donald Trump's tariffs are a national sales tax on working and middle-class families. And now, these tariffs are causing inflation to rise, as many of us feared. And there is too large a chance that this tariff increase is just the beginning as increased chaos on tariffs rise. Tariffs raise the price of groceries, add thousands of dollars in additional costs to the average household, and Trump's chaotic approach does nothing to make our economy stronger. Even worse, real wages are down for June as Americans pay more for groceries, electricity, healthcare costs. And that is before the big ugly betrayal, which will steal people's Medicaid, kill jobs, and jack up people's electricity bills. Remember what Donald Trump said on the campaign trail? He said that if elected, he would bring costs down on day one. It is now the middle of July. Inflation is going up, and that is the definition of a broken promise.
Senator Chuck Schumer, a Democrat from New York, the minority leader, on the Senate floor. Wall Street today, the Dow down 436, NASDAQ up 37, S&P down 24. From the Hill, the latest attempt by House Democrats to force a vote on releasing files related to the disgraced late financier Jeffrey Epstein failed on Tuesday. Democrats unsuccessfully urged the chamber to oppose a routine procedural vote, known as the motion on ordering the previous question, since failure would have triggered a vote on Congressman Ro Khanna, Democrat of California's amendment requiring Attorney General Pam Bondi to preserve, compile, and publish the Epstein files. The Epstein files have been a source of controversy in Washington, especially the Republican Party in recent days, with the MAGA base demanding its disclosure while President Trump directs those in his party to drop the matter. That was from the Hill. Here's Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon, Democrat of Pennsylvania, member of the Rules Committee, on the House floor.
Mr. Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to make in order amendment number 50 to H.R. 3633, offered by Representative Khanna, which requires the Attorney General to preserve and release any records related to Jeffrey Epstein. I applaud my colleagues, Representatives Veazey and Khanna, for their work to release the Epstein files. I strongly support these efforts and the release of the files. Last night at the Rules Committee, Republicans rejected an amendment that would have required the Department of Justice to release the Epstein files, multiple criminal investigations which allegedly documented trafficking of young women and girls by Jeffrey Epstein, a sex offender and financier with whom the president often socialized. For years, the president and those in his orbit, including Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel, alleged that prior administrations had covered up the identities of the rich and powerful people to whom Epstein had trafficked the girls and the facts surrounding his allegedly suspicious death. They came into office pledging to seek accountability for the horrific crimes by revealing Epstein's client list and other information, but recently backtracked and refused to release any further information. There appear to be only two explanations for this about-face. Either the Epstein files did not contain the explosive information that Trump and his allies claimed during his campaign, or this administration is the one covering up what's in the files. So last night, all of the Republicans on the Rules Committee, except one, voted against releasing the files. Why would they try to prevent the truth about Epstein's abuse and those he enabled from coming out? That's anybody's guess. But with this previous question, the entire Republican conference has the opportunity to correct that mistake. They can vote today to release the Epstein files.
Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon, Democrat of Pennsylvania, on the House floor. Congressman Brian Jack, Republican of Georgia, argued against this effort by the Democrats, saying that a vote on the resolution is more important than a vote dealing with the Epstein files because it would move forward the underlying the bills to debate on the House floor, governed by the resolution dealing with cryptocurrency and the defense authorization bill.
I join the millions of Americans who want accountability for anyone who committed crimes with Jeffrey Epstein, but I ask you, can you really trust the same radical leftists who presided over one of the greatest scandals in American history, a coup in Joe Biden's White House in which unelected staff actively sought the destruction of our country? Can you really trust the same radical leftists who sought to segregate those of us who opted to make medical decisions for ourselves during the COVID-19 pandemic? And can you really trust the same radical leftists who have spent the last decade trying and failing to tear down President Trump, one of the greatest presidents in American history? And can you really trust those same people who are trying to stop us from passing the most important cryptocurrency legislation in history and appropriations to fund our brave military today? A vote against today's rule is a vote against cryptocurrency and our Department of Defense.
Congressman Brian Jack, Republican of Georgia, on the House floor. The Republicans won the procedural motion, the attempt by the Democrats to force the release of the Epstein files, 211 to 210. But then the next vote on the resolution that governed debate further on the cryptocurrency bills failed, 196 to 223. Politico writes that some conservative Republicans say they want a guarantee the crypto bills would ban a central bank digital currency. That revote on the rule governing the bills, the debate on the bills, on the crypto bills, could come tomorrow. But on Epstein, there are still different views among House Republicans about this case. Congressman Tim Burchett was interviewed this morning outside the House Republican conference meeting.
On the Epstein files, I want to ask you if you think there's reason for Trump supporters to be angry with the administration over its handling of the Epstein files.
I'd just like to see the files turned over. As far as the list, I think Ms. Bondi misspoke. I don't know a lot of criminals, but the ones that I've studied usually don't keep a list around. So I would suspect that there's some trouble with the flight logs, because obviously somebody flies on this plane doesn't mean that they're a pedophile or doing anything illegal. It's what rich people do.
Do you support Bondi as the Attorney General?
I'm not a fan. I like Bongino.
Congressman Tim Burchett, Republican of Tennessee, outside the Republican National Committee. Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, Judiciary Committee Chair, also came out of the House Republican conference meeting, and reporters followed him down the street asking about Jeffrey Epstein.
Did Pam Bondi mishandle anything, though?
I got confidence in President Trump and his team.
Should Bongino resign or step down?
I got confidence in President Trump and his team.
But are you disappointed in the way that this has been handled? Even though that you have confidence, are you disappointed in how they've gone about this?
Like I like Dan Bongino. I like Pat Patel, Dan Bondi, and Todd Blanche. What I know is the contrast between working with this Justice Department and this FBI compared to Mr. Garland and Mr. Wray is night and day. They've been so much easier to work with and been helpful to our committee.
But do you personally have questions about the Epstein case?
I have total confidence in President Trump and his team. And I got to get to a deposition in labor court.
Do you still have personal questions about the Epstein case? There's nothing that doesn't confuse you?
How many times I can say it? I got total confidence in President Trump and his team.
Do you want to see the files yourself?
I have confidence in President Trump and his team.
Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, chair of the Judiciary Committee, walking down the street, followed by reporters after the House Republican conference meeting this morning, the closed meeting. President Donald Trump was asked about Jeffrey Epstein as he left the White House.
Mr. President, your daughter-in-law said that there was transparency in the Epstein case. Do you agree with her, sir?
The Attorney General's handled that very well. She's really done a very good job. And I think that when you look at it, you'll understand that. I would like to see that also. But I think the Attorney General, the credibility is very important. And you want credible evidence for something like that. And I think the Attorney General has handled it very well. On what? On what? On what subject? Okay. A very, very quick briefing, yeah. No, she's given us just a very quick briefing, and in terms of the credibility of the different things that they've seen. And I would say that, these files were made up by Comey, they were made up by Obama, they were made up by the Biden, we went through years of that with the Russia hoax, with all of the different things that we had to go through. We've gone through years of it, but she's handled it very well, and it's going to be up to her. Whatever she thinks is credible, she should release, yeah.
President Donald Trump speaking to reporters outside the White House before he left for Pittsburgh. Attorney General Pam Bondi today was asked about the Jeffrey Epstein case. It was during a news conference where she and the Drug Enforcement Administration were announcing some enforcement actions against drug cartels.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Administrator, I would like to get your perspective on what exactly is driving this, but I also have an off-topic question for the Attorney General in response to comments that President Trump made a short time ago, just a few moments ago on the South Lawn. He said that he would support you releasing additional credible evidence from the Epstein investigation. Is that something that you are open to doing? He said this just a few moments ago.
Let me take that first. This today is about fentanyl. This is about a wall of people right outside this room who have died from, I appreciate your question, but this today is about fentanyl overdoses throughout our country and people who have lost loved ones to fentanyl. That's the message that we're here to send today. Nothing about Epstein. I'm not going to talk about Epstein.
Attorney General Pam Bondi at today's news conference. It's a story from CNN. Half of Americans say they are dissatisfied with the amount of information the federal government has released about the Jeffrey Epstein case, according to a new CNN poll conducted by SSRS. In the days after the Justice Department released a memo saying there is no evidence the convicted sex offender kept a so-called client list or was murdered. Almost no one is content with the amount the government has shared. Just 3% of Americans say they're satisfied with it. A sizable chunk of the public either says it doesn't matter to them either way, 29%, or that they haven't heard enough about the case to say, 17%. President Trump's most ardent supporters online have been in revolt since the Justice Department's memo release, even as the president has implored them to move on from Epstein and publicly backed Attorney General Pam Bondi. That reporting from CNN. Washington Today continues in a moment.
America marks 250 years, and C-SPAN is there to commemorate every moment, from the signing of the Declaration of Independence to the voices shaping our nation's future. We bring you unprecedented all-platform coverage, exploring the stories, sights, and spirit that make up America. Join us for remarkable coast-to-coast coverage celebrating our nation's journey like no other network can. America 250. Over a year of historic moments. Only on the C-SPAN networks.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Mike Waltz, writes Associated Press, told lawmakers Tuesday at his confirmation hearing to be U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations that he plans to make the world body great again, echoing President Donald Trump's message for revamping America. Appearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Waltz is facing lawmakers for the first time since he was ousted as National Security Advisor for mistakenly adding a journalist to a private signal chat used to discuss sensitive military plans. Reporting from Associated Press, here is part of Mike Waltz's opening statement before the committee.
We should have one place in the world where everyone can talk
where China, Russia, Europe, the developing world can come together and resolve conflicts. But after 80 years, it's drifted from its core mission of peacemaking. We must return to the UN's charter and first principles. Peacekeeping certainly has an important role, but also needs reform. The U.S. funds 25% of these efforts, yet we have missions in Africa. I've talked to a number of you about this during our visits. They cost billions, tens of thousands of soldiers. We've had two that have been around since the 1940s with no mandate renewal and no end in sight. We must press the Security Council on length, cost, clear end states, and focusing on peacekeeping, not nation building.
Mike Waltz, nominated for U.S. Ambassador to the UN, testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. More from the Associated Press article on his appearance. The UN post is the last one to be filled in President Trump's cabinet following months of delay, including the withdrawal of the previous nominee. Waltz, a former Florida congressman, was introduced by Senators Mike Lee of Utah and Rick Scott of Florida as a seasoned policy mind and skilled negotiator. Again, that was from the Associated Press article. Here's more of the hearing. The committee's ranking Democrat Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire asking Mike Waltz about the U.S. and China and influence at the UN.
Mr. Waltz, these last few months have illustrated how China is all too eager to take advantage of our disengagement at the UN and around the world. And while we may not all like what some UN institutions do, if we aren't at the table, we can't influence the agenda. So do you agree that if confirmed, a central responsibility of your role at the UN will be to ensure that the United States is present, able, and willing to counter the PRC's growing influence at the UN?
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. I appreciate the question. I agree it's absolutely critical. And if confirmed, yes, I agree. I will take just a second to point out, under the first Trump administration, under the 2018 National Security Strategy, he really led the pivot, which I think pivoted the entire national security apparatus in Washington, D.C., away from the Middle East, away from counterterrorism, not as a zero sum, but to focus on the near-peer threat that China absolutely is. And then just in this administration, Secretary Rubio's first trip was down to Panama to address what we've all heard, hearing after hearing, an encroachment on the Panama Canal, a strategic waterway. Panama is now the first Latin American country in decades to back away from the Belt and Road Initiative. The malicious behavior, but also the potential of the Chinese Communist Party, the malicious behavior, the potential of the relationship, I should say, will be top of mind for me. I know it is for the Secretary and the President.
I agree with you, Congressman. That's why I find it so puzzling that there's been no coherent strategy for how to address China within this administration. There's no consistent messaging. If you look at where China is moving in, where the United States has moved out, within days of our shutting down of USAID and foreign assistance programs, China was already labeling the United States as an unreliable partner. Within months, China has moved in to so many of those foreign assistance programs that have been shut down, that had been operating for years to provide a role for the United States and so much of the world. And we have packed up our bags and gone home, and China's there. They're on the ground. And if you read the report, you will see instance after instance that questions why what we're doing makes us stronger against China and allows us to compete. So let me ask another question about the UN, because this administration has outlined a host of cuts to UN and its sub-agencies. It makes no secret of its disdain for multilateral institutions, but I haven't seen a plan from the administration on how it intends to push back against the PRC's influence. So can you describe how you think we should be doing that?
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. And just a few points to address there. Number one, I look forward to reading the report and to working with you, the committee, and the team on that. I have to tell you, though, in my experience, even in the last 6 months, but even more broadly, I've seen partners in the Middle East that were heading into the PRC's orbit make it very clear that they want to work with the United States, particularly since the election of President Trump.
Mike Waltz, nominated for U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Those questions from Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat from New Hampshire, the ranking member. Another paragraph from the Associated Press article on Mike Waltz's testimony. The hearing is providing senators with the first opportunity to grill Waltz over revelations in March that he added the Atlantic editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg to a private text chain on an unclassified messaging app that was used to discuss planning for strikes on Houthi militants in Yemen. That was from AP. This is when Mike Waltz was National Security Advisor. Senator Chris Coons, Democrat of Delaware, asking him about it.
I want to get to the larger questions of the UN and the UN mission, but in your role in the Army, in the House, as National Security Advisor, you have long handled classified and highly sensitive information. We both know Signal is not an appropriate, secure means of communicating highly sensitive information, and yet on March 24th, the Atlantic magazine published a series of Signal messages, including sensitive information about a U.S. military operation against the Houthis in Yemen, involving you and several other Trump officials. Were you investigated for this disclosure of sensitive operational information on Signal?
Thank you, Senator. And that engagement was driven by and recommended by the Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency, by the Biden administration, CISA guidance.
I'm sorry.
And I have here, just the use of Signal.
Share information on Signal.
The use of, the use of Signal is not only as an encrypted app, is not only authorized, it was recommended in Biden's, the Biden era CISA guidance. And in fact, if you just, it says here, I'll read it to you. Use only end-to-end encrypted communications. Adopt a free messaging application to secure communications that guarantees end-to-end encryption, particularly if you are a highly targeted individual, such as Signal or similar apps. CISA recommends end-to-end encryption messaging on both government and personal devices.
For sensitive military
of course, Senator. There was no classified information exchanged.
For sensitive military this, you were sharing details about an upcoming airstrike and the time of launch and the potential targets. I mean, this was demonstrably sensitive information. And the question I asked was, were you investigated for this expansion of the Signal group to include a journalist?
The White House conducted an investigation, and my understanding is the Department of Defense is still conducting an investigation.
Was any disciplinary action taken?
From the White House investigation, Senator?
Yes.
No, the use of Signal was not only authorized, it's still authorized and highly recommended.
Would you recommend the use of Signal for classified information to be shared between folks who have access to?
Again, we followed the recommendation, almost the demand, to use end-to-end encryption, but there was no classified information shared.
Did you speak to Secretary Hegseth about his decision to share detailed information on the specifics of an imminent military strike?
What we spoke about, Senator, was a highly successful mission that did something that the Biden administration did not do, was actually target the Houthi leadership. We subsequently saw a ceasefire, an increase in shipping, and a drop in attacks on our ships.
Well, look, here's what I hear on this exchange, and I want to get to the UN point. At the time, you took responsibility for having added a journalist inadvertently to a Signal chat. But it doesn't seem to me that the administration's taken any action to make sure this doesn't happen again. There's been no consequences, and yet the president continues to denounce those who leak information. We both know Signal is not a secure way to convey classified information. And I was hoping to hear from you that you had some sense of regret over sharing what was very sensitive, timely information about a military strike on a commercially available app that's not, as we both know, the appropriate way to share such critical information.
Again, Senator, I think where we have a fundamental disagreement is there was no classified information on that chat.
Mike Waltz, former member of Congress, former national security advisor at the White House, now nominated for U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, getting questions from Senator Chris Coons, Democrat from Delaware. There were two other ambassadorial nominees at this hearing, John Arrigo for the ambassador to Portugal and Christine Toretti to Sweden. But as NBC News notes, the vast majority of the questions were directed to Waltz. You can find the full video of this hearing at our website at cspan.org. Military Times writes the Senate on Tuesday confirmed retired Army Brigadier General Anthony Tata as the next Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, putting the controversial nominee in charge of a host of department programs supporting troops and their families. Tata was approved for the post by a partisan 52-46 vote, with all Republicans present in the chamber backing his nomination and all Democrats opposing it. Tata served as a senior advisor to the Defense Secretary during President Donald Trump's first term in office, a position he was appointed to after a failed attempt to gain confirmation as Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. His bid was derailed by the revelation of numerous inflammatory comments on social media and in past media appearances, including labeling of former President Barack Obama as a terrorist leader and a secret Muslim believer. That reporting from Military Times. From Fox News, Russian President Vladimir Putin has yet to publicly respond to the 50-day ultimatum President Donald Trump issued him, though one top official on Tuesday suggested that Moscow didn't care. The deputy chair of Russia's Security Council and former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev took to X to express the Kremlin's first reaction to the joint announcement by Trump and NATO Secretary Mark Rutte that Putin has 50 days to end its war in Ukraine or face 100% tariffs. Trump issued a theatrical ultimatum to the Kremlin. The world shuddered, expecting the consequences, Medvedev said. Belligerent Europe was disappointed. Russia didn't care, he added. That was from Fox News. President Trump was asked today, as he left the White House, held a news conference about that 50-day ultimatum.
Mr. President, why are you giving Mr. Putin 50 additional days to prosecute his war against you?
Oh, I don't think 50 days is very long. And it could be sooner than that. I don't think 50 days is very long.
Mr. President,
you should have asked that same question to Biden. Why did he get us into this war? You should ask that question. Yeah, and what did he tell you? Why did he get us into this war? You know why he got us in? Because he's a dummy, that's why. And you don't cover it right. But you should be asking that question to Biden. Why did he get us into this war? Because he's incompetent. It would have never happened if I were president.
President Trump speaking with reporters outside the White House. He also responded to a Financial Times report that he had asked Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during a recent phone call if Ukraine could hit Moscow if provided long-range weapons. President Trump saying, quote, no, he shouldn't target Moscow. The NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte was on Capitol Hill today meeting with senators. They all held a news conference after. The Secretary General was asked about the other announcement at the White House when he met with President Trump on Monday that the U.S. will provide Ukraine weapons, including missile defense systems, and other NATO countries would pay for it.
Mr. Secretary General, can you put some meat on the bones as far as the announcement yesterday? I think we know the Patriots are involved. What other missiles and weapon systems are involved? How would it function? What countries are involved?
Well, first of all, this is an ongoing process. So this is not just one package. So what NATO is good at is together with Ukrainians, through our command in Wiesbaden, to design packages which are maximum useful for Ukraine when it comes to air defense, when it comes to ammunition, when it comes to missiles. So this is what we will now be working on with the US. Of course, in a way that the US still has enough stockpiles for you to be able to defend yourselves, but also to massively make sure that Ukraine has what it needs. And this is also sending a strong signal to Moscow and to Vladimir Putin that he has got to take these peace talks seriously and get out this historian talking about history since 1250 and send a serious team to Istanbul.
Next question. Right here.
When will the first Patriot batteries arrive in Ukraine, and where are they coming from?
Yesterday we have seen Boris Pistorius here, the German defense minister, discussing this with Pete Hegseth. So they are working through all these details. Many Patriot systems have been delivered into Ukraine. So what we are now looking at is to make sure that Patriot systems directly from the US go to Ukraine. That's one way to do it, paid for by the Europeans, or that you get a front loading from European countries into Ukraine and then being backfilled by the US. So this is all worked through now. But again, the structures are established. The infrastructure, logistics is there, because this is not new. What is new is that yesterday President Trump announced that he wants the US stockpiles to open up in a way, of course, still Europeans paying and the US going forward being able to defend itself.
The NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte speaking at a news conference on Capitol Hill alongside Senator Tom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, and Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat of New Hampshire. Politico Europe writes, Russia is increasingly using chemical weapons in Ukraine in an effort to subdue the country by causing as much pain and suffering as possible, Europe's top diplomat said Tuesday. From the New York Times, Republican lawmakers grilled university leaders on Tuesday over accusations that they failed to do enough to combat anti-Semitism on their campuses, assertions that the educators strongly rejected. Members of the House Committee on Education and the Workforce questioned the leaders of Georgetown University, the City University of New York, and the University of California, Berkeley, for a little over 3 hours in the latest hearing on campus anti-Semitism. That was from the New York Times article. Here is part of that hearing, is covered by C-SPAN. Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, Republican of New York, questioning the CUNY Chancellor, Felix Matos Rodriguez.
Thank you. I want to begin by discussing the heinous scourge of anti-Semitism on your watch as Chancellor at CUNY. You are aware at Baruch, Jewish freshmen were welcomed with heinous anti-Semitic taunts about the hostages killed by Hamas. Quote, "Where's Hirsch, you ugly expletive, expletive? Go bring them home," end quote. Quote, "You ain't going home tonight. Go back to Brooklyn. All Zionists are terrorists," end quote. Are you aware of those anti-Semitic harassment slurs?
Those are deplorable statements, and if they were associated with the event at Baruch, an investigation was done and students were disciplined.
And students were disciplined in both of those cases? At Hunter, Jewish students were forced to enter the main university building under a swastika for hours. Is that correct?
My understanding of that is that the swastika was placed outside, and we have a custom of erasing all such deplorable symbols. In that particular case, there was a delay because it had to be referred to the NYPD for the anti-hate investigation.
Let me remind you of this particular case, because that's not according to your own staff. In fact, the Hunter College Director of Jewish Studies emailed university leadership requesting that the swastika be taken down. And instead, this was the response for everyone to see. Apologies, but it is not that simple. Is that the position of CUNY?
It is entirely unacceptable that.
And was this administrator disciplined who emailed?
Again, in that particular case, we were working with the New York City Police
was this
Department.
Administrator disciplined for sending this response?
Any case that we have will investigate, and the appropriate action will be taken.
So what was the appropriate action taken against this administrator in this case?
In this case, as I mentioned to you, we are working with the New York City Police Department.
So no disciplinary action has been taken by CUNY? Is that correct?
We will investigate any action.
So an investigation, but no actual action, like so many of these failed university presidents. But it's not just this case. You talked about how you focused on this since 2019. But let me remind you, in 2021, you hired Abdi Allah as CUNY's Chief Diversity Officer, and this role includes overseeing anti-Semitism complaints and initiatives. Were you aware at that time that this senior administrator you hired was previously employed by CARE,
parliamentary inquiry?
the Council on American-Islamic Relations?
Gentlelady will suspend.
My time. Can you hold the time? It was 2:25.
We'll hold the time.
Does the committee have a policy on publicizing people's personal emails?
This is a university administrator's email.
Email addresses.
No, we don't have a policy, I'm told, on that. And again, this is at the university.
This is a university email, a public university in the state of New York. Following up at 2:25, which my time is, I'm referencing the CUNY Chief Diversity Officer, who you hired in 2021. They were previously employed by CARE, the Council on American-Islamic Relations. Is that correct?
So she was hired to be the Chief Diversity Officer at the central office with no responsibility over cases that have to deal with students or faculty.
But yet you were aware that she was previously employed by CARE.
Again, I was not directly responsible for that.
Even though she was the senior chief diversity officer?
As I mentioned to you, I was not directly responsible for that hire.
So is it okay, from your perspective, obviously it is, to have a former employee of CARE? Let me remind you, CARE was a co-conspirator in a terrorist financing case and has ties to Hamas, a designated terrorist organization. Is she currently still employed by CUNY?
She is.
There you go. So no action, just words here today.
Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, Republican from New York, questioning the chancellor of the City University of New York, CUNY, Felix Matos Rodriguez, at today's U.S. House Education and the Workforce Committee hearing. Also testifying, the leaders of Georgetown University and UC Berkeley, latest in a series of hearings by this committee on anti-Semitism on college campuses. Congressman Ron Estes, Republican from Kansas, led a moment of silence on the House floor for a former intern, 21-year-old, who was recently shot and killed by a stray bullet in Washington, D.C.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize and celebrate the life of Eric Jackham of Granby, Massachusetts, who was an intern in my office. Eric's life was tragically cut short by a senseless act of violence in our nation's capital. Eric was an innocent bystander who was gunned down as he walked down the street less than 1 mile from the White House. I want to offer my prayers and condolences to Eric's family, friends, and loved ones. Eric was a rising senior at the University of Massachusetts Amherst who came to Washington to participate in our government. He was kind and friendly presence in my office, greeting everyone who came through the door with a smile. The loss of Eric will be felt for a long time. We will never forget his presence and kindness in my office. Those he met in his short term in my office will not forget him either. Eric Jackham was a dedicated and thoughtful and kind person who loved our country, and he gave his life in the service to others. I thank him for his service and for the impact he had on our lives. May he rest in peace.
Congressman Ron Estes, Republican from Kansas, on the House floor, joining him and also making some remarks. Two members of Congress from Massachusetts, Jim McGovern and Richard Neal, both Democrats, and then there was a moment of silence. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.